The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. Chapter 3. It was a warm spring night and I sat at a table on the terrace of the Napolitan after Robert had gone, watching it get dark and the electric signs come on, and the red and green stop-and-go traffic signal, and the crowd going by, and the horse cabs clippity-clopping along at the edge of the solid taxi traffic, and the pools going by, singly and in pairs, looking for the evening meal. I watched a good-looking girl walk past the table, and watched her go up the street and lost sight of her, and watched another, and then saw the first one coming back again. She went by once more and I caught her eye, and she came over and sat down at the table. The waiter came up. "Well, what will you drink?" I asked. "Pernod." "That's not good for little girls." "Little girl yourself." "Did garçon, un Pernod." "A Pernod for me, too." "What's the matter?" she asked. "Going on a party?" "Sure. Aren't you?" "I don't know. You never know in this town." "Don't you like Paris?" "No." "Why don't you go somewhere else?" "Isn't anywhere else." "You're happy, all right." "Happy, hell." Pernod is greenish imitation absinthe. When you add water it turns milky. It tastes like licorice and it has a good uplift, but it drops you just as far. We sat and drank it, and the girl looked sullen. "Well," I said, "are you going to buy me a dinner?" She grinned and I saw why she made a point of not laughing. With her mouth closed, she was a rather pretty girl. I paid for the saucers, and we walked out to the street. I hailed a horse cab, and the driver pulled up at the curb. Settled back in the slow, smoothly rolling fiacre, we moved up the Avenue de l'Opéra, past the locked doors of the shops, their windows lighted, the avenue broad and shiny and almost deserted. The cab passed the New York Herald Bureau with the window full of clocks. "What are all the clocks for?" she asked. "They show the hour all over America." "Don't kid me." We turned off the avenue up the Rue des Pyramids, through the traffic of the Rue de Rivoli, and through a dark gate into the Tuileries. She cuddled against me, and I put my arm around her. She looked up to be kissed. She touched me with one hand, and I put her hand away. "Never mind." "What's the matter? You sick?" "Yes. Everybody's sick. I'm sick too." We came out of the Tuileries into the light and crossed the Seine, and then turned up the Rue de Saint-Pérez. "You oughtn't to drink Pernod if you're sick." "You neither." "It doesn't make any difference with me." "It doesn't make any difference with a woman." "What are you called?" "Georgette." "How are you called?" "Jacob." "That's a Flemish name." "American too." "You're not Flamand?" "No, American." "Good. I detest Flamands." By this time we were at the restaurant. I called to the cocker to stop. We got out and Georgette did not like the looks of the place. "This is no great thing of a restaurant." "No," I said. "Maybe you would rather go to Foyot's. Why don't you keep the cab and go on?" I had picked her up because of a vague sentimental idea that it would be nice to eat with someone. It was a long time since I had dined with a pool, and I had forgotten how dull it could be. We went into the restaurant, past Madame Levine at the desk and into a little room. Georgette cheered up a little under the food. "It isn't bad here," she said. "It isn't chic, but the food is all right. Better than you eat in Liège." "Brussels, you mean?" We had another bottle of wine and Georgette made a joke. She smiled and showed all her bad teeth, and we touched glasses. "You're not a bad type," she said. "It's a shame you're sick. We get on well. What's the matter with you anyway?" "I got hurt in the war," I said. "Oh, that dirty war." We would probably have gone on and discussed the war and agreed that it was in reality a calamity for civilization, and perhaps would have been better avoided. I was bored enough. Just then from the other room someone called, "Barnes!" I say, "Barnes. Jacob Barnes." "It's a friend calling me," I explained, and went out. There was Braddock's at a big table with a party. Cohn, Francis Klein, Mrs. Braddock's, several people I did not know. "You're coming to the dance, aren't you?" Braddock's asked. "What dance?" "Why, the dancings. Don't you know we've revived them?" Mrs. Braddock's put in. "You must come, Jake." "We're all going," Francis said from the end of the table. She was tall and had a smile. "Of course, he's coming," Braddock said. "Come in and have coffee with us, Barnes." "Right. And bring your friend," said Mrs. Braddock's laughing. She was a Canadian and had all their easy social graces. "Thanks, We'll be in, I said. I went back to the small room. Who are your friends? Georgette asked. Writers and artists. There are lots of those on this side of the river. Too many. I think so. Still, some of them make money. Oh, yes. We finished the meal and the wine. Come on, I said. We're going to have coffee with the others. Georgette opened her bag, made a few passes at her face as she looked in the little mirror, redefined her lips with the lipstick, and straightened her hat. Good, she said. We went into the room full of people and Braddock's, and the men at his table stood up. I wish to present my fiancée, Mademoiselle Georgette Leblanc, I said. Georgette smiled that wonderful smile, and we shook hands all round. Are you related to Georgette Leblanc, the singer? Mrs. Braddock asked. Connais pas Georgette en Suède. But you have the same name, Mrs. Braddock insisted cordially. No, said Georgette. Not at all. My name is Haben. But Mr. Barnes introduced you as Mademoiselle Georgette Leblanc. Surely he did, insisted Mrs. Braddock, who in the excitement of talking French was liable to have no idea what she was saying. He's a fool, Georgette said. Oh, it was a joke then, Mrs. Braddock said. Yes, said Georgette. To laugh at. Did you hear that, Henry? Mrs. Braddock called down the table to Braddock. Mr. Barnes introduced his fiancée as Mademoiselle Leblanc, and her name is actually Haben. Of course, darling. Mademoiselle Haben. I've known her for a very long time. Oh, Mademoiselle Haben, Francis Klein called, speaking French very rapidly and not seeming so proud and astonished as Mrs. Braddock's at its coming out really French. Have you been in Paris long? Do you like it here? You love Paris, do you not? Who's she? Georgette turned to me. Do I have to talk to her? She turned to Francis, sitting smiling, her hands folded, her head poised on her long neck, her lips pursed ready to start talking again. No, I don't like Paris. It's expensive and dirty. Really? I find it so extraordinarily clean. One of the cleanest cities in all Europe. I find it dirty. How strange. But perhaps you have not been here very long. I've been here long enough. But it does have nice people in it. One must grant that. Georgette turned to me. You have nice friends. Francis was a little drunk and would have liked to have kept it up, but the coffee came, and Levine with the liqueurs, and after that we all went out and started for Braddock's dancing club. The dancing club was a bal musette in the Rue de la Montagne, Sainte Geneviève. 5 nights a week the working people of the Pantheon Quarter danced there. 1 night a week it was the dancing club. On Monday nights it was closed. When we arrived it was quite empty, except for a policeman sitting near the door, the wife of the proprietor back of the zinc bar, and the proprietor himself. The daughter of the house came downstairs as we went in. There were long benches, and tables ran across the room, and at the far end a dancing floor. I wish people would come earlier, Braddock said. The daughter came up and wanted to know what we would drink. The proprietor got up on a high stool beside the dancing floor and began to play the accordion. He had a string of bells around one of his ankles and beat time with his foot as he played. Everyone danced. It was hot, and we came off the floor perspiring. My God, Georgette said. What a box to sweat in. It's hot. Hot, my God. Take off your hat. That's a good idea. Someone asked Georgette to dance, and I went over to the bar. It was really very hot, and the accordion music was pleasant in the hot night. I drank a beer, standing in the doorway and getting the cold breath of wind from the street. 2 taxis were coming down the steep street. They both stopped in front of the ball. A crowd of young men, some in jerseys and some in their shirt sleeves, got out. I could see their hands and newly washed, wavy hair in the light from the door. The policeman standing by the door looked at me and smiled. They came in. As they went in, under the light I saw white hands, wavy hair, white faces, grimacing, gesturing, talking. With them was Brett. She looked very lovely, and she was very much with them. One of them saw Georgette and said, I do declare, there is an actual harlot. I'm going to dance with her, Let. You watch me. The tall dark one, called Let, said, Don't you be rash. The wavy blonde one answered, Don't you worry, dear. And with them was Brett. I was very angry. Somehow they always made me angry. I know they are supposed to be amusing, and you should be tolerant, but I wanted to swing on one. Anyone. Anything to shatter that superior, simpering composure. Instead, I walked down the street and had a beer at the bar at the next ball. The beer was not good, and I had a worse cognac to take the taste out of my mouth. When I came back to the ball, there was a crowd on the floor, and Georgette was dancing with the tall, blonde youth, who danced big hippily, carrying his head on one side. His eyes lifted as he danced. As soon as the music stopped, another one of them asked her to dance. She had been taken up by them. I knew then that they would all dance with her. They are like that. I sat down at a table. Cone was sitting there. Francis was dancing. Mrs. Braddock's brought up somebody and introduced him as Robert Prentice. He was from New York by way of Chicago and was a rising new novelist. He had some sort of an English accent. I asked him to have a drink. "Thanks so much," he said. "I've just had one." "Have another." "Thanks, I will then." We got the daughter of the house over, and each had a fine aloe. "You're from Kansas City, they tell me," he said. "Yes." "Do you find Paris amusing?" "Yes." "Really?" I was a little drunk. Not drunk in any positive sense, but just enough to be careless. "For God's sake," I said. "Yes." "Don't you?" "Oh, how charmingly you get angry," he said. "I wish I had that faculty." I got up and walked over toward the dancing floor. Mrs. Braddock's followed me. "Don't be cross with Robert," she said. "He's still only a child, you know." "I wasn't cross," I said. "I just thought perhaps I was going to throw up." "Your fiancé is having a great success." Mrs. Braddock's looked out on the floor where Georgette was dancing in the arms of the tall, dark one, called Let. "Isn't she?" I said. "Rather," said Mrs. Braddock's. Cone came up. "Come on, Jake," he said. "Have a drink." We walked over to the bar. "What's the matter with you? You seem all worked up over something." "Nothing. This whole show makes me sick is all." Brett came up to the bar. "Hello, you chaps." "Hello, Brett," I said. "Why aren't you tight?" "Never going to get tight anymore." "I say, give a chap a brandy and soda." She stood holding the glass, and I saw Robert Cone looking at her. He looked a great deal as his compatriot must have looked when he saw the promised land. Cone, of course, was much younger, but he had that look of eager, deserving expectation. Brett was damned good-looking. She wore a slip-over jersey sweater and a tweed skirt, and her hair was brushed back like a boy's. She started all that. She was built with curves like the hull of a racing yacht, and you missed none of it with that wool jersey. "It's a fine crowd you're with, Brett," I said. "Aren't they lovely? And you, my dear, where did you get it?" "At the Napolitane. And have you had a lovely evening?" "Oh, priceless," I said. Brett laughed. "It's wrong of you, Jake. It's an insult to all of us. Look at Francis there and Joe." This for Cone's benefit. "It's in restraint of trade," Brett said. She laughed again. "You're wonderfully sober," I said. "Yes, aren't I? And when one's with the crowd I'm with, one can drink in such safety, too." The music started, and Robert Cone said, "Will you dance this with me, Lady Brett?" Brett smiled at him. "I've promised to dance this with Jacob," she laughed. "You've a hell of a biblical name, Jake." "How about the next?" asked Cone. "We're going," Brett said. "We've a date up at Montmartre. Dancing." I looked over Brett's shoulder and saw Cone, standing at the bar, still watching her. "You've made a new one there," I said to her. "Don't talk about it." "Poor chap. I never knew it till just now." "Oh, well," I said. "I suppose you like to add them up. Don't talk like a fool." "You do." "Oh, well, what if I do?" "Nothing," I said. We were dancing to the accordion, and someone was playing the banjo. It was hot, and I felt happy. We passed close to Georgette dancing with another one of them. "What possessed you to bring her?" "I don't know. I just brought her." "You're getting damned romantic." "No, bored." "Now?" "No, not now. Let's get out of here. She's well taken care of. Do you want to?" "Would I ask you if I didn't want to?" We left the floor, and I took my coat off a hanger on the wall and put it on. Brett stood by the bar. Cone was talking to her. I stopped at the bar and asked them for an envelope. The patron found one. I took a 50-franc note from my pocket, put it in the envelope, sealed it, and handed it to the patron. "If the girl I came with asks for me, will you give her this?" I said. "If she goes out with one of those gentlemen, will you save this for me?" "C'est entendu, monsieur," the patron said. You go now? So early? Yes, I said. We started out the door. Cone was still talking to Brett. She said good night and took my arm. Good night, Cone, I said. Outside in the street, we looked for a taxi. You're going to lose your 50 francs, Brett said. Oh, yes. No taxis. We could walk up to the Pantheon and get one. Come on, and we'll get a drink in the pub next door and send for one. You wouldn't walk across the street. Not if I could help it. We went into the next bar, and I sent a waiter for a taxi. Well, I said, we're out away from them. We stood against the tall zinc bar and did not talk and looked at each other. The waiter came and said the taxi was outside. Brett pressed my hand hard. I gave the waiter a franc and we went out. Where should I tell him? I asked. Oh, tell him to drive around. I told the driver to go to the Parkmont Souris and got in and slammed the door. Brett was leaning back in the corner, her eyes closed. I got in and sat beside her. The cab started with a jerk. Oh, darling, I've been so miserable, Brett said.